In most fantasy stories, the hero wins, gets the girl, and everyone cheers. But in dark rogue epic fantasy, if the hero wins, they usually lose their soul, their friends, or limb in the process. And that is exactly why readers can't put these books down. But how do you structure a story that relies on betrayal and pyrrhic victories without making the readers hate your protagonist? If you don't know who I am, my name is Jason Hamilton, and I'm a fantasy author who is honestly just obsessed with story structure. To figure this out, I did not just guess. I conducted a deep dive into the absolute bestsellers of this specific subgenre, books with over 1,000 reviews and at least a 4.2 star rating average, and using a mix of AI analysis and my own scene-by-scene breakdown, I've developed a 45-chapter template that maps out exactly how to write the perfect dark rogue novel. Let's dive right into this structure, starting with Act 1. In this genre, you cannot start with a farm boy finding a sword. Fans of dark rogue fantasy don't want to watch someone learn how to hold a dagger for 6 chapters. They want competence immediately. Your first chapter, which I call the Shadows Introduction, has one job: show the protagonist being elite. We need to see them infiltrating a high-security area or executing an assassin. This establishes their baseline. They are dangerous, they are skilled, and they operate in the gray areas of morality. Paradoxically, while they are lethal, they are usually socially or politically vulnerable. They might be the best thief in the city, but they're still just a rat in the gutter to the people in power. But we can't let them stay comfortable for too long. Chapter 2 is the inciting betrayal. This is more than a minor setback. This is the universe kicking the legs out from under their chair. A safe house might be burned, a handler sells them out, or their identity is blown. This genre runs on paranoia. By stripping away their safety immediately, you force the rogue into reactive motion. They can't just sit in a tavern anymore and wait for a quest giver. They have to move to survive. They regroup in Chapter 3, usually in the shadows, realizing that their world is smaller than they thought. This is where you introduce the few allies that they actually trust, some found family or old contacts. You need to establish what they have to lose emotionally because physically, they've already lost their safety net. Then you hit them with the first counterstrike in Chapter 4. The antagonist is not waiting around. Elite forces ambush the protagonist, and this fight needs to go badly. We need to see that despite the protagonist's elite skills shown in Chapter 1, they are vastly outmatched by the antagonist's resources, and this creates the power gap that drives the rest of the book. Most writers think the next big heist happens at the end, and in this structure, the first heist happens at the end of Act 1, and it goes terribly wrong. After seeking dangerous knowledge from a mentor figure in Chapter 5, usually someone shady who demands a price, the protagonist moves to the heist preparation in Chapter 6. They gather a crew, and this feels like a classic trope. You have the lockpick, the muscle, the mage. The reader settles in and expecting a triumphant victory that solves the Chapter 2 betrayal. But they are wrong. Chapter 7 is the catastrophic heist. This is your first plot point. The plan falls apart, somebody betrays them, or the intel was bad or it was a trap all along. Crew members die. The protagonist barely escapes, wounded and isolated, and this failure is essential. It forces the protagonist to realize that their old methods, being a lone wolf or running a small crew, won't work against this new threat. They have to change their approach entirely. They spend Chapter 8 recovering and reassessing. They realize the conspiracy is not just about a stolen artifact or a local crime lord. It connects to ancient forces, high politics, or cosmic threats. To survive, they have to stop playing small ball. This brings us to Act 2, where the texture of the story changes. The protagonist stops hiding in the sewers and starts infiltrating the palaces. Chapter 9, entering the lion's den, sees the rogue adopting a disguise or a new identity to enter the antagonist's world. This is the fun and games portion of the story, but with high stakes. We get to see the street rat navigating a noble ball or a magical academy. It highlights their adaptability. But they don't go unnoticed. Chapter 10 introduces the Forced Alliance. A powerful figure spots the rogue and offers a bargain. Work for me or I expose you. This introduces a major subplot and complicates the protagonist's autonomy. They are now juggling their own survival, the conspiracy, and the demands of this new dangerous ally. Then comes the training or trial sequence in Chapter 11. Even though they are elite, they aren't elite here. They have to prove themselves in a duel, a tournament, or a test of magical prowess. This establishes their pecking order in the new world and creates rivalries. Of course, we need to complicate their heart too. Chapter 12 brings in the romantic connection, and in this genre, romance is rarely soft. It's a dangerous entanglement. The love interest is often on the other side of the conflict or is a target. The connection creates vulnerability, and if the rogue cares about someone, the antagonist has leverage. Everything changes in Chapter 13 with the discovery of hidden truths. This is the midpoint. The protagonist finds the smoking gun, a prophecy or a hidden history or evidence that the antagonist's plan is apocalyptic. The stakes shift from I need to survive to the world is going to end. The antagonist responds immediately in Chapter 14 with the assassination attempt. And this is more than a bar fight. It is a coordinated hit. Survival is luck and skill combined. This leads to Chapter 15, the Fractured Alliance. The pressure breaks the group. Arguments erupt over methods. Should they use the dark magic that they found? Should they kill the innocent guard to get to the target? The morally gray area gets darker. Chapter 16 delivers the Dark Mentor's revelation. That shady figure from Chapter 5, we need to learn who they really are. Maybe they are training the antagonist. Maybe they are the villain's brother. Moral complexity is the name of the game here. Then we return to the social struggle in Chapter 17 with the social masquerade, a ball or council meeting where words are sharper than knives. This contrasts nicely with the physical violence of the previous chapters and allows for some romantic tension amid the danger. By the time we hit the massive turn into Act 3, the protagonist has to lose a piece of their soul. Chapter 18 is the crossing of the moral line. To solve a problem, the protagonist does something unforgivable. Torture, murder of a sympathetic character, or sacrificing an ally. They cross the event horizon. There's no going back to being a good guy. Then the floor drops out. Chapter 19 is the revelation of betrayal. Someone close to them has been working against them. Their isolation is total, and this leads directly to Chapter 20, the Dark Pact. This is a hallmark of the genre. With no allies or no resources, the protagonist turns to a forbidden source of power, a demon, a corrupt artifact, or a criminal kingpin. They make a deal that they know they will regret, but they need the power now. This signifies the all is lost moment where the only way forward is through the dark. If you want to grab the full text of this breakdown along with the detailed sequel guide and analyses of other genres, I put it all together for you. You can buy the book on Amazon, but you can also get it at no extra charge, along with many of the other book genre analyses that I put together by joining the Story Hacker Gold group. We enter Act 3 with the desperate infiltration in Chapter 21. Using the new dark power, they breach the antagonist's fortress. It's tense, claustrophobic, and deadly. Chapter 22 reveals the true stakes. They see the ritual starting or the army marching. The ticking clock starts. There is no time for a perfect plan, there is only time for action. Chapter 23 allows for the gathering of the unlikely allies. They scrape together everyone left. Rivals, ex-lovers, people who hate them but hate the villain more, and it's a motley crew embarking on a suicide mission. The assault begins in Chapter 24. It's chaotic. People die. This leads to Chapter 25, the sacrifice of allies. In traditional fantasy, the sidekicks might get knocked unconscious, but here they hold the door. They burn the life force. They die so the protagonist can take one more step. Before the final boss, we have Chapter 26, the confrontation with the Dark Mentor. The protagonist has to overcome the person who taught them, rejecting their cynical philosophy and putting them out of their misery. It's a symbolic death of the protagonist's past. Then the battle against the antagonist in Chapter 28. The protagonist cannot overpower the villain. They are weaker. They must win through cunning, utilize the dark pact, or make a sacrifice that the villain couldn't conceive of. And when they win, Chapter 29 is the pyrrhic victory. The city is saved, but half of it is burned down. The villain is dead, but the protagonist is cursed. The love interest is traumatized or gone. Victory tastes like ash. You might notice the template continues for quite a while after the final battle. Many writers stop at the victory. In dark rogue fantasy, the aftermath is just as important as the fight. Chapter 30 covers the resurrection or recovery. The protagonists barely survive. They are scarred physically and magically. Then we handle the political aftermath in Chapter 31. Killing the bad guy creates a power vacuum. The rogue is now a political problem. Are they a hero or a murderer? The institutions don't know what to do with them. Chapter 32 forces a reckoning with personal costs. The adrenaline fades and the grief sets in. Relationships are damaged because you can't just kill 100 people and then go on a picnic. Chapter 33 is the distribution of spoils and debts. Remember that dark pact in Chapter 20? At this point, the bill comes due. The demon wants its soul. The crime lord wants their favor. The plot doesn't just end, it actually just gets more complicated. We start aiming for the sequel in Chapter 34 with the glimpse of new threats. The villain was just a pawn or the death woke up something worse. Finally, in Chapter 36, the protagonist makes the choice of path. They can't go back to who they were in Chapter 1. They have to choose a new identity, a general, a wanderer, a monster hunter. The story winds down with the romantic resolution in Chapter 39, which is often an acknowledgement that they can't be together or that it will be incredibly hard, and the departure in Chapter 41. The final chapter, the ambiguous ending, leaves the readers satisfied but uneasy. The world is safer now, but the darkness remains. Now, you may have dragged your protagonist through hell for 45 chapters. Now, how do you write book 2? You don't just hit reset. The biggest mistake is trying to force the character back into the box of Chapter 1. They aren't a street rat anymore. They are a god killer or a kingmaker or the owner of a dark artifact. The scope has to change. In the sequel, the success of book 1 becomes the problem of book 2. If they became the head of the Thieves Guild, the conflict isn't stealing a purse now, it's managing a civil war within the guild while the king tries to crush them. The heist preparation chapters turn into war council chapters. The training sequence isn't about swordplay anymore, it's about diplomacy or magic that they can't control. However, the overall DNA must remain. You have to keep the competence porn. Even if they are a general, create a scene early in book 2 where they have to handle a threat personally, reminding the reader that they are still lethal. You must include another dark pact. The stakes are higher, so the compromise must be worse. If they sold a year of their life in book 1, maybe they have to sell the safety of a province in book 2. And you must keep the desperate infiltration. Even if they command armies, engineer the plot so that the only way to win is for the protagonist to put on the cloak, take the dagger, and go in alone. That is the promise of the genre. If you keep the emotional rhythm, the paranoia, the isolation, and the high cost of victory, you can scale the story from the gutter to the throne room without losing the gritty soul that made readers fall in love with it in the first place. If you want to grab the full text of this breakdown along with the detailed sequel guide and analyses of other genres, I put it all together for you. You can buy the book on Amazon, but you can also get it at no extra charge, along with many of the other book genre analyses that I put together by joining the Story Hacker Gold group. And I'll see you in the next video.